Imagine a situation where your company is really, really embracing the open source ecosystem, and that's a huge part of your ethos. However, you have to run an organization. Ultimately, you have to be able to pay people through the power of creating a company that's wrapped in open source. It's not an easy challenge, but it's one that has been taken on by Emily Omier. Let's find out what she does and how she does it. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the host of your DiscoPosse podcast. Thank you for listening, for watching, for doing all the things. I'm really happy because you're about to see a great conversation with Emily Omier. Emily was an amazing person to chat with, not only in her capability to understand the business of open source and how to create successful messaging and organizations and ultimately really build a company. This is customer-facing messaging. This is internal. This is literally HBR lessons that no one is able to give, and she can give it. Emily is a consultant, and of course, she has an amazing podcast herself. So I hope you love this show just as much as I did. I'm a huge fan of open source ecosystems and being able to support them, especially when we can build a great company and promote the use of open source as part of it. How great is that? Let's do this together. This is the power of community. This is the power of great messaging. And Emily is very thoughtful in her approach to it. And we also talk about her choice to become an entrepreneur herself as a part of this. I have to give a quick shout out, of course, to the folks that make this possible. Make sure if you do get a chance, follow the links below. We've got a lot of great people that support the podcast, so check it out. And I can say that if you're looking for stuff, follow the links below. Big fan of the friends at Veeam. So you can go to veem.am/DiscoPosse and you can find out everything you need for your data protection needs across the board. Super cool. Love the tech. Love the people. And of course, did I mention I'm the co-founder of Diabolical Coffee? Not only is it pretty fantastic, it's devilishly good. And diabolically awesome swag. You can check out amazing shirts. You can go to Diabolical Coffee. You can check out the limited edition shirts. Go check it out. Diabolicalcoffee.com. Do the thing. Follow the links below. Without further ado, let's get to it. This is Emily Omier, and this is the DiscoPosse podcast, and it's on now.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Omier. I am a positioning consultant who works with companies in the cloud native ecosystem, particularly those built around or related to open source projects. And you are listening to the DiscoPosse podcast.
I love professional podcasters. They're so good at this. And with that, we want to jump right into the good stuff here. So Emily, thank you very much for joining. I was excited to get connected. So I can, and for folks that don't already know you, we'll get into your intro, but I got to give a big shout out to Chris Saltis, who connected us together. And Chris is he's so fantastic. I had such a great chat with him, and so he got to break the video barrier here on the podcast, which was kind of fun. And then immediately after we talked, he says, "You've got to talk to Emily Omier. She's amazing." And so I was like, "You had me at a recommendation," and here we are. So Emily, if you want to introduce yourself for folks that don't already know you, and we'll talk about the open source positioning challenge and a lot more, actually.
Yeah. So the first thing is there's probably a non-zero number of listeners who are like, I wonder what a positioning consultant is. And I wonder what positioning is. So let me start there. Most people who are non-marketers might not have heard of positioning. Even marketers often have sort of a distorted idea about what positioning is. Some people think that positioning, some marketers, I should say, think about positioning as like a positioning statement that you write out, and honestly is just kind of like an exercise that doesn't end up often being super useful. But what positioning really is about creating the correct assumptions in the mind of everybody. So ultimately, the most important is in the mind of your prospects. But you don't want to just think about in the mind of your prospects, because those aren't the only people that matter. You also care about like what journalists who work in the industry think about your product and how they're going to write about it. You care if you get venture funding, you're going to care what investors think about your company. If you have an open source project, you care about what the community thinks about your project. So positioning is about creating the right assumptions. And it comes down to, how do you describe your product? What market are you targeting? So how do you segment your market, which is how do you determine what are the characteristics of your ideal customers? And that's and then there's a last thing, which is like, what are the values, the unique value that you provide? And that's what I help companies figure out, basically, is what's the best way to describe what our product is. That seems sort of basic, but a lot of founders actually find it really challenging. And who should we market to? Who's going to find this most useful?
Yeah, we're going to get into some of the neat, dirty behind the scenes work, which I often cringe even when I have to use these phrases, because one of the things that you do particularly well is really create a human connection through the use of words that ties technology to value and human value. And ultimately through human value, we get business value as well. And we often forget that that takes a lot of work, right? It's the old, what's it, the Mark Twain thing, right? If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. It's very easy for us to go on, write about our story, and I've often done that, right? Like, it's, you're trying to give your elevator pitch. If it takes a 120 floor building to give your elevator pitch, then it's not an elevator pitch. You need to literally be able to, sort of quickly tell, hey, this is a real problem that people have. You may have experienced it yourself. So yeah, actually, what my company does is we solve that in a way that's actually never been done before, which allows you, to be able to do this and this and this, and as a result, then this is actually, now you can get on to doing better things. And it's like, it seems so fundamentally simple, but it's really difficult to do. And then on top of that, we then have to bring in, I'll say, kind of like mechanized language around it. And even you used a word that makes me gnash my teeth, and I use it all. I don't even use it myself because I've got an allergy. Is the word prospect, because I very much, like, I know that it's a term, it's a sales term. We use it, and I still fight it internally. I say, like, prospective customer. Yeah, yeah. Because I know, if I've actually had folks that are really good technical sellers, and they'll say, hey, I was talking to a prospect the other day. And I was like, oh, that hurts just hearing, because I know I'm a prospect. Versus, like, I'll say, like, you should say, I was talking to somebody else who's, similar function, similar role as you, over at another company, or like somebody else in the community, and I get them to kind of soften the language. But the truth is, behind the scenes, we have to, we talk about prospects and value statements and positive business outcomes and all this stuff like this. But how did you
It's
get to
funny.
do this, Emily? Like, this is, no one thinks that this is a fun idea to take on, because this is a lesson and an exercise in frustration building this stuff.
I'm not sure that's true, that nobody thinks it's fun to take on.
Ah, there we go.
But I was just going to say that I was actually writing a blog post this morning, and I found myself writing like buyer, no, and I deleted it. Prospect, and I deleted it. And then, but like, I do think so. I used to be a journalist, and and I'm also like I'm a language person. I also speak a couple foreign languages, so I really think word choice is very important. And yeah, to the point about prospect versus prospective customers versus buyers or whatever, like, ultimately there is a difference between saying your buyer and your prospect anyway. So it can be really hard to make sure that you're using the right words, especially when some of them are kind of cringeworthy.
Yeah, at least because we have to talk about your EB, your economic buyer, your technical champion, and like, there is at least sort of common phrasing. I always just, it hurts me when that leaks out. It's kind of like when an internal email makes it to the outside world. You're like we know how that happens behind the scene, But then it becomes like, if you've ever watched a rather famous bit by Bill Hicks on marketing, and it's a fantastic thing to listen to, not if you're in marketing and are soft at heart, because he kind of rips it all apart. And the whole thing, he's like, oh yeah, you're basically snakes and demons in what you're doing. But the truth is, in technical marketing and in marketing in general, it is very much about creating a connection between, people, value that you can bring them, what you can give back to them, and
Mhm.
ultimately, run a sustainable organization and a business commercially through doing so. And what's particularly interesting about your ability and your successes in doing it so far, and in future, which I'm sure there'll be a lot of, is doing this in open source very much changes, because it's a different, there's a different commercial side, there's a different value side. So I guess that's the real thing, right? Getting into messaging and positioning fantastically, it is enjoyable and it's neat and it's challenging. And then
Yep.
adding this, like, but we're going to do it in open source projects. And like, most people be like, all right, I'm out, because this is a
W-
tough world to be in.
Right. Well, so the first thing to acknowledge is that most engineers, um, most developers find themselves really allergic to the word marketing. I think for all of the reasons that you just mentioned, that it sort of sounds slightly dirty, and particularly if we're talking about open source, like open source is not about making money. So what, of course, I'll just put a caveat that that's not entirely true. I don't think that all open source is like
I
it's
guess
not completely divorced from money.
Yeah, the
But
primary function of it is not to do it. However, in order to sustain it, I know where you're at with that one. So yeah, I appreciate that you sort of laid that caveat there.
right. Yeah. So, particularly with companies that I work with, they're related often to an open source project, but they also have venture funding. They're also like their end goal is to build a company, not just to be, technical hippies. Um, but so I think that that's one of the challenges when we talk about marketing. But positioning, so first of all, I should actually step back. One of the misconceptions about positioning is actually that it's part of marketing, and it's really like it's a higher level business function. So like uh, if a prospect came to me and it was their head of marketing, and they said, look, we really need help with positioning, I would say, great. Is the CEO on board? Are the founders on board? Are they going to be part of this discussion? And if that marketing person says, no, this is not a project I'm going to take on because it's going to fail. And because positioning it has implications for your product roadmap. It has like profound implications for your sales strategy. You might end up changing your price point based on your positioning, because if you're going to sell something, um, let's just say you're going to sell something for financial services, uh, it should be expensive. And if you're trying to sell something cheap and you're selling it to a market that expects things for them to be expensive, that's a problem. So it has all of these implications throughout the business. So it's really not just marketing.
Yeah, and
Uh,
and in fact, when you say positioning, it's not just like word positioning, and it is truly full market positioning. And it goes, as you said, beyond just like the thing that does the little type ahead on the website when you go to the homepage and you see a little slider. Like that's reflective of positioning, but that in itself is not positioning.
Yes, that is exactly right. I also have some people that'll like send me a website and they're like, "Can you tell me if this company has great positioning?" And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, you can tell. So if yes, you can usually tell by the website. If if the website, if you don't think that there's great positioning reflected on the website, that could be a website problem. It could be a copywriting problem. It could be a positioning problem, but you can't really know for sure.
Yeah, actually, there was somebody I spoke with the other day, and he was telling me about the story of his company. He's a single engineer with a co-founder, and they're doing really neat stuff. And so I took a look at the website because he sends me the email address. And so we met just through a friend. I was helping him out and to help him with a technical problem. And so I talked with him and I was like, oh, actually, tell me about what your platform's doing. I'm actually very interested in what the problem is you're solving. And he said something for like in 2 minutes, he gave me this incredibly profound statement of like, you know, how we have this problem that goes on. Like, we want to make this not suck for people. So we took on this task because we realized there's a better way to do it. And he goes through this thing, and I was like, Alan, you just totally nailed this. I went to your website, no idea that this is what you do, right? You need to connect those two things together because the story you just told me is incredibly compelling. And it made me say, okay, well, how do you do that? Like it did all the right things. And it was so funny that there can be this weird, like sometimes the marketing of the message in the website, like you said, can really be good,
Mhm.
but, what's the churn rate? What's the attach rate? What's the growth rate? Like, there's other things, like you said, about positioning is much more than just, "Oh, that's really neat. I know what you guys do now."
Well, that's sort of the fundamental, though, about positioning is it's about making your prospects. Oh, I'm using that word again.
That's all right. I know I'm gonna make you overthink that every time now.
So it's about making everybody, not even just prospects. So customers, your current customers, you also don't want them to be confused. So it's about reducing confusion. And part of the goal is you want, when somebody comes to your website, you want them to immediately understand what problem you're solving and how you solve it, and is your solution right for them or not. You always remind people like you're not going to boil the ocean. You're a startup with $1 million or $10 million or whatever. You're not gonna be Facebook tomorrow or next quarter, and you need to focus on some sort of specific market. And so having somebody come to your website and say, "Oh, I understand what this is and it's not for me," that is also a good outcome
Right.
because now you have not wasted hours of your marketing and sales team's time on somebody who is never going to buy your product.
That's actually
So
that's something that people don't even realize. It's not is depositioning your audience is the most important one of the most important things that you can do. And I forget that sometimes too. I'm like, you need to immediately, so when someone gets there, they're like, "Yep, really cool. Not for me." I'm not gonna waste this person's sales cycle time by calling them and saying, "Hey, I'm curious how this may work to my use case," or whatever. "Tell me about the
mhm.
thing you do," and then you spend an hour and they go, "Yeah, it's not gonna be a fit."
Yep, it's saving everybody time. It's saving the prospect time, it's saving your sales team time. And so that's a good outcome if somebody says, "Nah, this isn't for me." But you want that to be clear as soon as possible in the sales cycle or really in the marketing cycle. So it gives you the ability to focus a lot more. But it also increases the chances that those people that are a good fit are going to understand that immediately. And so then that makes them more likely to reach out. And so you get this at the same time you have those that are not a good fit um, leaving. That's great. Those that are a good fit more likely to understand that.
Now, this definitely doesn't come from, "I think I'm gonna be good at this." Like, you've obviously got some road time or some you've got history that
Mhm.
allowed you to be able to connect these things together. Like, there's certain fundamentals of it that are actually based out of, like, cognitive psychology and behavioral psychology and a lot of neat stuff there. But you generally can't, go and read a bunch of that and then come forward and say, "All right, perfect. I can nail the story for you." So, Emily, how did you come to choose this as a path for your own choice?
That's a really good question. So I never know where to start in my story, but I think I'm going to start sort of way back when, which is, I spent my 20s doing a bunch of random stuff. and including starting 2 companies that never had any revenue. Like I think just my mom knew that they existed, and um, then I went to journalism school, and then I was a tech journalist for a while, and then I moved into content marketing, and that was really sort of the catalyst for when I started to think a lot more about positioning. Because, oh, and I should mention that I was always self-employed. So I was always working as a consultant freelancer. And that's kind of just my personality. But anyway,
So you've
this is,
always had skin in the game. Like you've always chosen that I am responsible for the outcome here, which is it's a brave thing to do right out of the gate.
well, I think if somebody when I was in college, when I was like 18, had told me that I could have a career in sales, it would have changed my life. But it didn't really even occur to me that like there are people that make a living selling stuff.
Yeah.
So I enjoy the hustle of like meeting new clients and all of the things that are associated with being a consultant and not having a job. I enjoy, and including not having a boss.
Yeah. I think a lot of people that I've especially here, of course, I'm lucky enough I talk to amazing folks like yourself all the time who've like walked these unique paths and on their own. And the my favorite thing is almost all of them would describe themselves as unemployable because it's like I am not going to they're not going to look at the mission on the back of the wall behind the front desk and say like this is for me. I'm like I've got my own mission I got to complete.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna say that I would never ever take a job, but, like, I would say that my circumstances would have to be pretty dire in order for that to happen. Um,
What I would find
but
even in doing so, you would become, as we called, I used to describe myself as an intrapreneur in that you create you that drive and that methodology is baked into you, and so even when you're in an internal team, you will very much go outside the lines as a founder of a function inside a company. So there's even if you were to go there, it would probably be a temporary stint until you got back out again.
true. Well, fingers crossed it doesn't come to that.
That's even better, yeah.
Um, but actually, so the fact that I was working for a lot of different companies, and I started to really focus on the cloud native ecosystem and technology companies. And so the fact that I was working as a marketing writer for these companies is really relevant because first of all, marketing is often the first department that feels the pain of bad positioning. And second of all, when you're outside of a company working as an external consultant, you see it really well. Because I think what happens is when you're working inside of the company, you kind of start drinking the Kool-Aid, and it's like everything kind of makes sense to you because you're really immersed in everything. And but when you're looking at it from outside and you're trying to get some direction on this piece of marketing writing, and you're like, who are we writing this for? And they're like, well, our audience is SREs and platform engineers and developers and also VPs of development. And you're like, whoa, those people care about very different things. Like, how am I going to write this? And so it actually got pretty frustrating because this was so prevalent that people were just not really capable of giving me clear direction, which, when it happened, basically meant that my project was not going to be successful. And I knew that. So that's when I started to think, I can see that this is a problem. I tend to be actually a really big picture person. I think this is why I didn't do such a great job when I was employed in my very early 20s. I'm not super detail oriented, so
Well, this
Anyway,
is the interesting thing, and I actually heard a great interview the other day, and it talked about the sort of the creative mind and the process of being a creative person. They said, and the fellow said, unfortunately, he says creative people tend to make a lot of money for other people and not for themselves until it's far too late for them to enjoy it. Yeah, it's and
mm,
it's I suffered the same sort of challenge of, every year it gets to my annual review and they're like, "Hey, it'd be great." Like I work in a startup and they give me a lot of autonomy and they're a fantastic team. And so when it comes to annual review time, it's not like when I worked at a big financial company, they're like, "Okay, according to this, you're in the 9 box or the 7 box." They get all these crazy things. And then, but it would be like every year I'd say, "Hey, look, it's the time of year where we say it would be great if you were better at project management and detail oriented, long view, content." I'm like, I'm never going to be that. I'm like just going to lay that out there right now. I'm never going to be good at this stuff, and I'm going to be fantastic at what I do. But they're like, we want to put you in the 8 box and then I'm like, no, I don't want to be there.
it actually, I think, makes me fit really well with this industry because a lot of engineers are detailed oriented.
Yeah,
And so what the ability to step back is really what they're missing. And most of the founders that I work with, they're engineers and they've now founded a company and they're really good at like making sure their code is not missing a punctuation mark or something like that. And I would suck at that.
yeah.
But
It is a beautiful thing of the merger of those styles because you have a technical. You understand the technical audience and sort of the buyer audience as well as the consumer audience, or as they say, the users, another
mm,
word I
the
often cringe that we say, but
the users and the buyers.
yeah, but it is a really good mix that like you want the technical founder to be a technical founder, not a big picture market maker. Like
Mhm.
you want them to be fantastic at what they do. And you will be fantastic at what you do to allow them to continue to, build product and think about what's next.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of the founders that I work with, like they're not just engineers, they're very, very good engineers. And these are, they're people that have actually, and then I'll go into a caveat. Sometimes that is also the challenge is that they're very, very good engineers. And so, and they've often worked at companies that are very tech forward. They're very, very far on maturity curves. And so it can be a big challenge. In fact, I think this is a big challenge, sort of the industry in general, is sort of connecting to the real world experience of a mediocre engineer who works at a mediocre or works in, a mediocre technology organization. And, mediocre, we often use that word to mean like terrible. But I'm more meaning in sort of an average term.
Right,
They're
truly
not
like
great.
a median on a curve, not a mediocre as in they're not really that good, which is yeah.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and the honest truth is like that's somewhere around the medium is that's where most people are going to fall. That's where most users are going to fall. It's where most buyers are going to fall. Even if we're like, directors of development or VPs or whatever, not every one of those VPs is an amazing VP at his or her job, and not everyone is inside an organization that's an amazing technology organization, and that's okay. I don't think there's a problem with that. It's just that I think the ecosystem and the founders of these amazing startups need to sometimes need to do a better job at sort of stepping back and thinking, okay, where is the market, like where is the market actually at? Where are the people that I can help? Where are they? How do I meet them where they are? And how do I use terms that are going to resonate with them? And what problems are they actually experiencing? Oh,
That
and then
is yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then there's one other thing, which is like, what do they actually perceive as being an alternative to my product? So that's a big part of positioning is what are the competitive alternatives? And the common thing is you ask somebody, what are your competitors? And they will name another company. If you actually drill into it and say, what are the competitive alternatives? The competitive alternatives are doing nothing.
Right. Yeah,
So,
that's sort of, and it hurts me to say it because I know it's an easy answer, but it is true in that, our biggest competitor is status quo.
oh,
It's true, so too true. In so many cases, it seems like a gimme if you say it, but like no, that's most people struggle from just like, hey, this is good enough.
I mean, it's both for business buyers, but also for consumers. I mean, I was looking at cars last month, and um, if you ask a car company, like, what's your competitor, they'll talk about some other car. I didn't buy a car. I'm not going to buy a car. And that's probably what, like, most of the people that enter their funnel, so to speak, are going to end up not buying a car. They're going to do nothing.
Yeah, yeah, and when it comes to the technical buyer and the technical economic lead buyer, so like a
Mhm.
CIO, CTO, somebody who's in an organization, they're uniquely challenging to market towards because they are generally, technical. So they ask harder questions. To use your car example, more people are going to go to buy a car because they need to get somewhere and they kind of don't care what's inside the car. They just want it to be the right price. They've got a certain set of criteria. The ineffective alternatives are the bus, yeah, not having a car. Like but the buyer is most often not technical. And in fact, when we get into the technical marketing piece and technical positioning, you have the
Yep.
worst case scenario of super technical people. They're like, "What does it do here?" And so that whole thing of, I don't want to dwell on speeds and feeds, but we're going to dwell for 45 minutes on speeds and feeds, and all these little, knobs and dials on what it can do.
Yeah, so to go back to the car example, that's actually really good. So, um, when you're doing technical marketing, one of your biggest competitors is build it yourself, DIY. So, instead of buying your thing, we're going to build a platform and ourselves. If you're buying a car, like, quite frankly, I do not think that one of your competitors is I wasn't even thinking like, oh well, I'll just build a car myself.
That's right.
And I don't think that that's like a real realistic competitor for most people.
Yeah,
But
that
it is in the technical marketing that's a really big major competitive alternative.
Yeah, and we run into that problem too of, especially when you've got a really good engineering organization, and it's the problem we call NIH, or not invented here, right? When you go and you
Hmm.
pitch a product, then they're like, they just, like, you can see them sort of squinting as they're listening to your discussion, and they look at the engineering team and said, "Couldn't we do something pretty close to this ourselves?" And you're like, "Oh, no." Like, that is a real unfortunate confidence in the ability to throw people at it.
Hmm.
And I'm like, if you've not heard of the mythical man month, this is going to end poorly for you.
Yep. And I it's that's also the user buyer discussion, because sometimes this, like, whatever it is that you're selling, like, that looks like a really interesting problem to solve. And if you're targeting the wrong level in an organization, you're just going to be giving them an idea, and they're going to think, gosh, I would rather spend the next 6 months working on replicating your product internally than doing whatever it is that I'm doing. That's usually when you're marketing too low, because most likely once you're getting to the people that have more of like a more business metrics that they care about, and they're managing people, they do not want the people on their team building that platform. That is not in their best interest. But the people built that the engineers themselves, oh yeah, that's a big problem. They want to spend some time building that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You often find out it's like going to family therapy when you're in these discussions with folks. And I'm lucky to be very close to the customer experience all the time. And it's like, I was a user. I literally sat in the desk as a systems architect for a couple of decades. So I know the pain directly. it's easier for me to relate it when I talk about product and outcomes and what we get. And it's funny that you can get a lot of folks that are, really strong technical champions, and they have a genuine day-to-day problem that maybe their boss doesn't know about. And that gets uncovered like beautifully if in the
Mhm.
right conversation, because and you need that as to do proper positioning and selling and renewing, because
Yep.
if you only give value to the user of the consumer of the product and they don't see the KPIs being
Mhm.
affected at the top, then they're gonna be like, I don't know that I'm getting value from this thing I just saw a renewal for. And it's like you said, positioning isn't just about prospects, it's about your existing customers. You got to keep reminding them that either you've got
Yep.
value or we're even adding more value and more capabilities. And how do you relate those?
Yeah, and part of positioning in some of the things that we work on narrowing down is who is the right buyer. So again, when you think of an engineering organization, it's not like homogenous. There's going to be the SRE teams. Oh, we like to talk about breaking down silos, and in reality, there's still silos in most places. So, unless you're selling to like the CTO who's responsible for the whole thing, there's going to be silos, and most of my clients are not going quite that high level.
Yeah, and this is the funny part is, as much as I see that silo slide on everybody's sales deck, guilty as charged. We know the truth is that there's just no way to really break those things down. The reason why we had to start calling it like DevSecOps, they're like, why do you need
Mhm.
to explicitly say sec? I'm like, because no one invited security to the party, and it wasn't pervasive to the flow of code. And they're like, oh, okay, and all of a sudden, someone described the other day, they called it biz DevSecOps. And like, we've officially
Ooh,
figured it out that we
I,
forgot to include the business people in the discussion.
I have not heard that one yet, and I love it.
So now eventually it's going to become this like biz dev sec, like there'll be like three
Customer
other.
success.
Yeah, that's right. CX ops. Oh, but so
Yeah.
in practice now, this is just like you talked about positioning. It's important to know who not to position for and to deposition the
Mhm.
the unimportant or the not valuable, prospect. In your experience of doing this stuff, most of your success in knowing what to do probably comes from seeing a lot of what not to do and seeing metrics that showed that that was the case. So I'm curious, Emily, when did you start to tie in how do I measure the effectiveness of positioning and marketing and like where this comes together?
Yeah, that's a really good question of how it's measured. So the first thing, uh, yeah, positioning is interesting to measure. So you're not gonna improve your positioning and then tomorrow you're gonna fix these things. So often we're talking about like a fairly fundamental shift in how the company is talking about itself and operating. So we're not going to see like a change tomorrow, but there are um, there are some things that will change immediately, and then there are metrics that you should see improvement on if in fact your positioning has been improved. So the first result is, this is a human one, is that I find founders have more confidence, because often the pain point that they come to me with is that they don't know how to talk about their company. They don't know how to talk about their product. And it's frustrating. And they they feel like their sales calls are kind of, they feel like they're not going great, basically. They feel like the first 15 minutes the prospects are confused, and it's really frustrating. So that does change immediately. Is there's often a shift in sort of how the confident the founder or founders feels in sort of having a discussion or describing. So after positioning, you should be able to describe your product in like less than a sentence, like 5 words.
Yeah.
And so that's the first change. And then the second thing, this gets into like, what are the signs that your positioning kind of sucks? And then obviously if your positioning is better, it's going to you're going to see improvement on those metrics. So one of them is high churn at like everywhere on the funnel. And so if you have a lot of people coming to your website, but like every part of your funnel, it's just incredibly leaky, that's probably a positioning issue. If you have a lot of churn in your customers, that's probably a sign that the customers maybe thought they were going to get something else. And then they signed up and they were like, oh, whoops, this is not actually what I was expecting. I don't actually need it. That's a positioning problem, right? You
Yeah.
want people to like actually get the thing that they thought they were getting. So basically, you should be improving your conversion rates at all spaces on the funnel, the marketing sales funnel. You should see lower customer churn, and those are what I would say. I mean, and ultimately, right, those are going to lead to better revenue numbers, et cetera. But those are the really bottom line positioning metrics that I would look at. And here we have like the sort of problem is that those are marketing metrics, and that's why people think that positioning is a marketing problem.
Right.
And uh, but right, if you have a high customer churn, maybe your product sucks. um,
Yeah.
or
Also, it could be a
it
problem.
yeah, or it sucks for the people who actually end up buying it. And so it really isn't just marketing, it's really high level. Another thing that I also see with when positioning projects are really successful is that it's easier to get, it's the PR is easier. It's easier to get in the press because whether you're doing PR yourself, whether you've hired a team, it's easier for them to communicate with other people in the industry about what you do, and
Right.
that makes it easier for them to write about.
Yeah, and the challenges as people, as humans, especially in technical, we've got a lot of strong technical founders. Like you said, it's a tough. It's not in their brain to like they're not built to be able to tell the story in that's why we always talk about Jobs and Wozniak and people get really irked and angry like Jobs wasn't technical, he was just a marketing guy. I'm like, well, he was technical. He didn't necessarily write the code, but he had the ability to take the technology and relate the story. And he
Hmm.
even attributes, he says, the ability to do so wasn't just from fantastic storytelling, which he was particularly good at, but he has this book, and I actually have it on my shelf. I had to hunt it down around the world. It's called The Business Value of Computers. And it was effectively an accounting guide into how to actually measure the effectiveness of using computer systems in large organizations. This is like mainframe type of adoption, but he said if you can't show them that there's metrics that are going to matter to them and then a human side to that story, then no technology is going to save you from a bad sales problem, which and as technology founders, like I said, so you come in there. I know a lot of amazing technologists who probably wouldn't pass a Turing test. There's nothing wrong with them having an incredible amount of skill. So let's put somebody beside them who gets why they're doing it and what they're doing it, and then can make that a storytelling exercise, which then ultimately becomes based on the foundation of positioning. Like you said, it's it has to come from there. This is the core, and then everything should always go back to like, okay, here's your value drivers or whatever you call them. But
Hmm.
like it's in the founders. There's a great book actually called The Founder's Mentality, and it's actually by Bain and Company. They're a marketing and advisory firm in Boston,
Hmm.
not to be confused with Bain Capital, which is always funny because my company as well is one of the Bain Capital companies. But it's very, very cool that they talk about this idea of like the founder can get frustrated because they see the selling position moving away from what the product was meant to do, and then they lose track of it, and then the numbers start to go.
Hmm.
And what's worse is that it doesn't get felt like you said. You change your positioning and you do it right today, you don't notice it tomorrow. The metrics are going to play out over time.
Yeah, and it can be pretty quick. And then the other thing, so there's a couple comments here. So first of all, it can be pretty quick. I mean, if you actually implement your positioning, you can feel it pretty quickly, but it's not going to be tomorrow. And the other thing is that almost always the best positioning for your product isn't necessarily be the positioning that you had in mind when you created it. And that is why, actually, so that's part of why founders have to be involved when we do a positioning exercise, because it can involve almost like shifting the identity of the company. And if that can mean shifting the identity of the founders. And so that's the most challenging part, actually, of positioning is like having everybody sort of let go of what they thought they were creating, and then figuring out, like, well, what is the thing that actually is here that was created, and how do we highlight its strengths in a way that's going to get customers really excited about it. And positioning, it can change over time. It's not something you want to change like every month, but you should sort of check in with it like once a year, once every 6 months, to see if it's still working. And one of the other thing is, like, if there's a big market shift. So for example, with COVID-19, there was, and everyone's working from home, that can present certain challenges to organizations. And maybe you want to reposition your thing. Maybe the competitive alternative to your product is walking over to your colleague's office. Well, that's not an option anymore, and so you need to be able to sort of capture that. Oh, there's a last thing I wanted to say, which is that actually Apple is a really good example of good positioning. And there's a lot, I can think of a lot of ways. First of all, when in the early days of Apple computers, it was not a general purpose personal computer. It was for creatives.
Right.
And this, and that ultimately is how Apple computers became like the cool version, right? Like, if you were an accountant, you got you didn't get an Apple. If you were like a graphic designer, you definitely got an Apple computer. And that had ramifications, obviously, not just for their marketing, but it was their product was also different, and it had to focus on different types of functionality. And then when the iPhone launched, so think about the name of iPhone. An iPhone is actually not really a phone. Like, it does have phone functionality, but that's like a tiny little bit of its functionality.
Yeah.
But at the time that it launched, that was what the company and Steve Jobs decided to accentuate, because that was something that people associated with, like, putting in their pocket and taking places. Imagine if they had called it like the iPocket computer or something. Like,
That's
that
right.
sounds crappy.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, if you watch the iPhone launch video, like, Jobs does all this, like, talking about voicemail and like call forward, like all this stuff that's phone functionality that like nobody uses now, and probably nobody even used then, but it reinforced this position of this is a phone, and so it makes sense. It makes sense as a product to me.
Yeah, it becomes what's the comparative that will make sense
Mhm.
to people, then they can map it over. And this I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. The words in that we use are interesting, and I get lessons in this all the time. So, the founder of my organization, he used to he's like super technical. He's like really, really able to do incredible things, but knows the business, third time founder, like really, really got a good sense of how things go. And people kind of forget how strong he is at the business side of it. And so you get people and he's like, this is what we do. And this is, you go through the whole thing. But in the end, we as humans try and find differentiating words to make it easier to explain or sell. And so people always say, like, we solve this problem in a unique way. And he stops and he goes, and he asks us, and it was my favorite thing to hear. He goes, "Can I ask you, did you have a lot of friends when you were a kid?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, well, yeah, I was fairly popular, whatever." Like, okay, and so in high school, throughout changes in your life, yeah, yeah, okay. Were you unique? And you're like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Exactly. You were not popular because you were unique. You were not smarter because you were unique. Unique isn't a word that you want to use to describe your problem as a differentiating feature." He's like, "It may be unique in the way that it solves the problem, but the product is not unique. Like, don't use words like that." He says, "Because they're going to pull you down a trap and they'll say, everybody says they're unique. Everyone says they're the first to market. Everyone says they're industry leading." It's like these are not important words when it comes to what we're actually doing. So why do we get caught up in those lovely words, Emily? Because they sound fun, like it's easy to go to.
Yeah, I think that you're right. It's part of it is that we want to be unique, and I think people like to think of their product as being totally unique, and it is. Usually there's not something that is exactly like that thing anywhere. Of course, nobody cares if you solve their problem in a unique way. They just want it solved. They don't care how you do it.
That's right.
And if you solve it in a way that's totally non-unique, it's still solved. Um, and the other thing I was going to say actually is that this is relevant to this discussion of developer marketing because developers, engineers, they tend to have a lower bullshit tolerance than a lot of other markets. And so I think you're probably more likely to get that pushback when you're like, we have a unique way of solving this problem. I think that's going to sound like bullshit. That's going to pop out as bullshit for
I can already hear the person at the
this.
table going like, like me, like, sure, it's unique. Whatever,
I mean,
dude.
then they're gonna look through the like 8 million open source projects on GitHub, and they're gonna say like, no, I found this project that has like 2 contributors, and it's actually exactly the same as yours. So
Even patented is a tough one because, like, while it is a very differentiating thing, a very specific thing about the way you solve the problem, like just saying patented, I've even found that in competitive, it's like use this, like we have 17 patents in as a competitive alternative. I'm like, the company you're competing with has 2,000 patents. They've like that's not a business differentiator. It shows your longevity, it shows your uniqueness in a way, but like IBM has more patents, and what's the old joke, right? Like the most patents in the world are for the mousetrap. Go to the hardware store. Your mousetrap is a piece of wood with a spring on it. I don't care how many patents there are. I just need to catch a bloody mouse.
and sometimes I think it's important to keep in mind that you are ultimately selling an outcome. You're solving the problem. And if you get a taxi and you want to go to your house from your work, so it's a route that you go all the time, you get a taxi and the taxi driver says, "Hey, look, I'm going to take you a totally unique way to get to your house." You're going to be like, "Whoa, that does not sound good."
Exactly. Now, the other thing that's important in what you've described in like positioning, and it ultimately is a question for you. It's choosing your market, attacking a niche that you can be effective in, and
Mhm.
how to market towards. You as well have,
Mhm.
really lived strongly in a niche of Kubernetes and this cloud native marketplace, which is going to become huge. I mean, it already is huge, but what drew you to how that is an effective place for you to be able to market towards and position towards?
Yeah, this is a great question. Also, because I wanted to talk a little bit about how it's not just products that are positioned, and it's not even just consultants who are positioned. It's even if you have a job, it's still a good idea to be known for something and to be a specialist in something. And even if you are a developer, right? Maybe you're a specialist in a particular language. Maybe you're a specialist in a particular type of business. So I think that it's really important for everybody to try to specialize to a certain extent. And when I think about uh, what a consultant or even somebody who's going to be an employee should think about as they're positioning themselves, is where the overlap is between things that they are good at, things that they enjoy, and things that people are willing to pay money for. And the same goes with industry, right? You could apply that to what you do, or you could apply it to the industry that you're going to work in. And for me, obviously, like I have tons of interests, and either being a positioning consultant is not the only thing that I think I'm pretty good at. But and but there's this sort of overlap here where working in this industry, and it helps that I started as a marketing writer in this industry. There's sort of an overlap of people that actually need this and are willing to pay money for it, and that I'm good at it. In terms of why, I think I'll go back to the discussion of not being very detail oriented. So I was actually interested in like web development, and I played around with Drupal for a while in my 20s. I don't know if you know Drupal, but it's like
I've spent a
WordPress.
little time in that. It was the beta to WordPress's VHS. It was technically better, but unfortunately not marketed well enough to make a big landing.
I actually don't think that's true. I think Drupal is one of the
Ah,
most successful open source projects out there, and
there we
that
go.
was was founded by the open source maintainer. It was sold, I don't know to who, but for like $2 billion, like a totally insane amount of money. Um, so actually, Drupal's an open source success story in a lot of ways, because also has a huge community. Anyway, my point being, it's not like an entry level web development platform. It's quite complicated.
Yeah.
It's very powerful, but you really need to be like getting your hands in the code in order to be successful with it. So I taught myself how to do some stuff, but I'm ultimately like I'd miss a period somewhere and it wouldn't work, and I just get really frustrated. And yeah, that it just wasn't for me. I couldn't deal with like I missed a piece of punctuation and my work is a total failure. Um, and I think, but I sort of remained interested in this sort of the technology field in general, and what we can do with software. And and then I think there's a little bit of a cultural fit, even if I'm not the detail oriented engineer. I think there's a cultural fit between the um, sort of like, it's really hard for me to put my finger on what the cultural fit is. Um, Let me think about this for a minute. I feel like it's really easy for me to empathize with the sort of developer problem or the developer personality of like liking to work alone, consultant, freelancer, um, being really interested in like finishing projects, being a little bit type A. And so I think that there was that as well, sort of being interested in the technology and then just feeling like it's a cultural fit. Um, yeah, that like when I went to KubeCon, there was KubeCon, and then there was like an accounting conference that was in the same location. And you just like you looked at all the accountants, and I was like, whoa, those are not my people. I do not feel comfortable there.
It's so funny that when I've always enjoyed when you go to especially a conference center and there's like multiple things, and like we're sitting here and we're making nerd jokes about technology, and in the room next door they're like, so this idiot filled out a T1029 instead of a T4228. Like, holy moly, where did this guy from? Mars? And like and totally meaningful, hilarious, anecdotal humor over there. But it's like every industry, everything has a community and has its own nuances and isms about it. But when actually, I want to pull on the Drupal string that you hit something really neat. So my perception in general awareness is that WordPress has been, I'll say, most known to be successful relative to
Mhm.
Drupal. And it becomes from two factors. One, I didn't track the growth or ultimately the trajectory of Drupal. I knew about it, but because I go everywhere and I see WordPress, so I have a perceived understanding that it is more successful, even though it may not be. And this I bump into in Kubernetes folks all the time. They're like, "This is
Mhm.
Kubernetes is incredible. It's like winning the container war." So that's well, how big is that war, right? Relative to
Right.
virtualization and cloud and everything else. So how how do you deal with that situation when someone says like, no, like this is the metric that matters to me, or this is my opinion of a metric, and you're like, well, we actually have to look at the real metric that matters.
I mean, ultimately, like, you do get to decide. So if you're the CEO of a company and you decide that X metrics matters to you, I mean, maybe that's the most important metric. I mean, maybe I don't agree with it. Maybe your investors don't agree with it.
Yeah.
But that is one of the advantages of being CEO is you get to focus on the metrics that you think matter to you. And does it, some companies might get really hung up on like we have the biggest number of users and
Or
is
GitHub stars. Oh.
or we have GitHub stars, and, like, those GitHub stars, they're free, so, um, you know, do I think that a company should probably have, like, some hard dollars as a metric? Yeah, definitely, but, um, if you think, if you are the CEO and you're getting really hung up on some other metric, like, that's okay. I think the thing that people should take out of this this discussion about WordPress and Drupal is that just because you are not necessarily a household name, or you're not like, a household name for technologists, doesn't mean that you don't have a successful company. That you can have a very successful company. You could go public. You could, have a giant exit, or you could just run your very successful company. You can make tons of money, and people could think, oh, Drupal is just, it's a failed competitor to WordPress.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, it doesn't really matter. Like, maybe you were never in a position where Drupal made sense, and so you might think that. This is why I started using Drupal, because I erroneously thought it would be a good idea for just a random person setting up a website. It's not. WordPress is the best option for that.
Right.
Um, if you have a really complicated website, that's where Drupal is appropriate. And so that's why you see like university websites are like big organizations like the US government websites, places like that. Those are the ones that use Drupal. And so and they have like all this super complex functionality. But that means ultimately that they don't become a household name because they have a relatively they have a niche, but it's huge, right? It can still let them be acquired for $2 billion. I think it was
Yeah.
$2 billion. I might be wrong about that. It was huge.
Yeah, but it's interesting too. Yeah, like we I see this with positioning and marketing as well. It's like the careful thing of, what is it if you say it's for creating websites, like you're
Mhm.
going to have a real tough road. If you say it's an enterprise grade CMS based on the most widely adopted and broad open source ecosystem, be like, oh, okay, cool. So a legitimate CMS. Now I know it's a different use case. And they start to then map the use cases in their mind of like, oh, versus, yeah, I want to go set up I don't want to go to Wix and set up my website. I'll let WordPress looks like it may work for me. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Drupal is not the thing that you just, like, set up on Bluehost and start your personal blog on. It's
Yeah.
not the thing. But yeah, for the more complex setups, it is. And, so in the startups that I often work at, they also get really hung up on this, and then you ask, like, "So how many customers do you wanna sign this quarter?" And they're like, "5." And you're like, "So 5, like, that's not very many." I mean, you don't have to go after a huge market in order to sign 5
Yeah. This is
customers.
not time to be buying mailing lists. You've got a fairly niche area. What's the flow is going to be much different.
Right, and you'll end up being much more likely to hit that 5 if you're going after a market that only has 500 people in it because
Yeah.
you can speak directly to them and they're going to listen. Whereas if, you're going after like a 5 million people, I mean, how do you even like know? You don't. You're not. People are going to ignore you. That's when they think that you're a spammer. But if you speak directly to their needs and like SREs and financial services institutions like you, oh, okay, yeah, that's me.
Now this will be interesting too, because you've got a good background, and you came from tech journalism, and you've obviously got some really good strength, and you're a fantastic writer, by the way. I read a disturbing amount of your content in preparation for our discussion, and and listening to a lot of your podcasts. So I had the easiest job of coming into this hour. I was like, Emily's going to be able to run on anything. This is fantastic. But I'm curious on your thought on what the role is of journalism, literally today, relative to when you were in it, versus like it was very different in like PR went to certain, key journals, and then you got, I think now I just find it so different. I'm curious, as somebody who lived on the inside, what's your sense of the place of tech journalism today?
Right. Oh, I was about journalism in general. I was going to say I'm super cynical.
As
But
most journalists probably are.
yeah. Um, but I'm actually less cynical about tech journalism. So I actually have 2 degrees in journalism, one from Columbia and the other one from a university in France. And journalism is approached very differently in Europe because I'm talking about sort of general interest
Yeah, yeah.
journalism. Because in general, in the US, journalists are encouraged to like claim to be totally neutral on everything, which I happen to think is bogus because we're all human beings and we all have opinions.
Yeah.
Um, in Europe, that is not how journalists operate. It's not how news organizations operate. So you'd have like a newspaper, and this is the newspaper of the left, or this is the newspaper of the Catholic Church, and they they don't pretend that they're totally neutral. So
Right.
this relates to tech journalism because I think my less cynicalness about tech journalism is that in general, I think tech journalists are more like that. So they're a little bit more open about where we take money from these companies, for example. These are our advertisers. It's very clear. And I think what I do want to say about tech journalism in general, and I'm not actually totally out of tech journalism. So I write for the News Stack, and I do so in a journalist capacity.
Right.
And one of the reasons that I do is because I learn so much. And I think the biggest misunderstanding among founders about tech journalism is that the journalists who cover technology and who cover particularly like open source, cloud native stuff like that, they are really knowledgeable and they understand the ecosystem. Honestly, I think that they understand it better than anybody else because this is their job is to talk to people from everywhere, to talk to end users, to talk to all the different vendors, to talk to the super big guys, to talk to the super little guys, to talk to investors. So they are really knowledgeable. And yeah, speaking of like the no bullshit theme, um, journalists also tend to be like pretty no bullshit, but definitely when you talk to a tech journalist, like they they're able to spot the bullshit
Yeah.
and like really easily. And the not just they might not spot like if there's like something in your technology that doesn't work, like they're not generally engineers themselves, they won't get that. But if there's something about your business or your messaging that doesn't make sense, they will definitely pick up on that.
I've as somebody who's had to do the dance of, going into PR, and like going out and doing launches and interviews. It's so funny because yeah, I've and one fellow I always enjoyed chatting with, and it was painful every time. It was Simon Sharwood. He worked for the Register, or he wrote for the Register. I think he's independent as well. And yeah, I remember going to him one time, and we had changed the version number of the product, And it was like it's like a fairly small thing, but it went from like 5.9 to 6.0. And he says, so why is the 6.0? And I didn't really know the right way to tell him, because we ran out of numbers. And like, this was seemed like, I'm like, I knew the implication of a major number change. And I was like, oh, Simon, you're going to make me say this stuff that like, it just happened that we ran out of, we couldn't be 5. And my engineering team were like, we'll make it 5.10. I'm like, that's 5.1, right? Like 5.10. It's it's not 5.10. There's no 5.10. But that was Simon just said, he's like, I want to get right to this. What matters? Why is this a dot zero? And I was like, cool. So he picked up that as a customer, they're going to see like, oh, this is a major release. This is going to have a significant change. Tell me why. And it was neat. And Alex and the team from the News Stack have been a huge fan of that, of the whole organization from the start. So it was like a glory day when I presented on Kubernetes at the OpenStack conference in Boston. And there was a fellow just like chuckling away in the front during my presentation. I was like, all right, I feel like I'm doing good. Like I'm engaging the audience. And then I saw the article the next day in the News Stack, and I was in there. I'm like, yeah, I feel like a hero that I made the News Stack. But Alex has done a fantastic job of going from purely independent writers talking about technology and an ecosystem that he and his team cared about, to being able to cross the chasm to being commercially viable, but maintaining journalistic, integrity. So that it's very clear this is a sponsored post, but maintains that very good content in a sponsored post. He doesn't let it become a commercial. And I think that's where, like you said, there's a no BS factor of like, I'm not just going to let you come in and say, what would make this drink better if it was built by this company, on this technology. Like, there's no room for that. And Alex and the News Stack are a great example of folks that make sure they keep that nice hard line.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right on. I think, tech journalists, and this is where positioning comes in. I mean, you really want to like tell them what the value is. Like, why does this matter? And it's, unfortunately, it's a thing that I think a lot of companies get wrong, because they'll send, an email. We're releasing a new version, and it's version, 6.1.3.5, and I'm like, I don't care. Tell me why I should care.
And the fun part is, of course, because you have to parse out an hour conversation or a 20-minute conversation and then get it to a few meaningful bites that matter. And I remembered also, it's fun, Beth Pariseau, she's also a great writer. And I talked with her for like an hour on Kubernetes stuff. And we go through this whole thing. And at the end, the quote that comes in the article was like, Kubernetes on virtual machines is like a gateway drug to Kubernetes on bare metal. Like, you say it almost as a throwaway, but you got to remember, when the microphones are on, everything's live and everything's on the record. And it was fun. Like I said it for a reason. It wasn't meant to be like, I hope she doesn't write this, but every once in a while I'll say something, and then my PR team, you see their eyes widen up, and you're like, uh-oh, did I just say something that, like, hopefully they don't catch that quote in there. But
well, in journalism school, when I took classes in radio, they would say, like, you never turn off your mic. You would say, like, oh, okay, we're done. You'd like take off your headphones, but you would keep your mic on. Because people would always say like the interesting or sometimes incriminating thing when they erroneously assume that your recorder was not running.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I've always got an incredible respect for the true art of journalism, and in that thing of like, yeah, are we off the record? And it's the whole, like, when I read more and like delved into how that works and the idea of deep background and how it's like, there's so much to real journalism that unfortunately is just shaded by what we call media. And that it's really been broken, but the real true journalist, the journalists out there and the principles and practice of it are fantastic and so necessary. But the world has kind of shifted in a weird way of it becomes, see the 23 things that his gym trainer would, doesn't want you to hear about ab exercises or whatever. Like it becomes these weird outbrain articles that are on
Mhm.
mainstream media sites, and it gets really lost in the power and importance of that journalism.
And I think possibly another reason I'm so interested in positioning actually is that journalists specialize. And this, to an extent that, for example, developers generally don't like developers. I think often make the mistake of thinking I'm a developer and I write software and I could work at any company and it doesn't matter what industry and whatever. So journalists almost always specialize in something, and you want this because their job is to explain, um, to know what's important and what isn't, and to really understand, a particular subject. So, yeah, so I've always thought that it's really important to really be a specialist in something, and that it applies to products too.
Yeah, and it's funny if you look at it. I mean, it's positioning. It's
It
positioning in
is.
every way, right?
It is.
Are you going to write for Le Journal or Le Monde? Like which is the one very distinct audiences,
Mhm.
very specific demographics. If you're not aware, and then same as developer. Like, sure, you can be a journey person developer who can write fantastic code and do all that stuff. But if you want to be specialized, if you want to really exceed, it's about knowing how to map it to business requirements, how to relate it, how to engage with customers as you're building features and exploring stuff and user experience. There is much
Yep.
more that requires that knowing your customer, and it's effectively positioning of everything.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, I could talk to you all day, Emily. This has been fantastic. And I want to thank you very much. And for folks that do want to connect with you through various means, of course, I'll have the link to your website. You can go to emilyomier.com. And what's the best way if they wanted to engage with you on social media, and also plus go check out Emily's podcast and your blog. I said, great writer. If you search for Emily Omier, there's a wealth of content that comes up on Google because you're a very prolific creator, and it shows in how well you approach everything you do.
Yep. So let's see. So my podcast is called The Business of Cloud Native, and the goal is to sort of interrogate why companies use cloud native technology, what end users say, what people in the ecosystem say, etc. And you can go to thebusinessofcloudnative.com. It'll actually redirect you to my website, but it's if you have trouble spelling my last name. And also my blog, Positioning Open Source. You can go to positioningopensource.com. That will send you in the right direction. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And unless you send me a spammy connection request, I will probably accept it. And so, yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Um, One of my goals for this year is to set up and be active on Twitter. I think I have an account, but I am not sure. So, yeah.
What my LinkedIn, I always enjoy when somebody, because I have an open policy. I accept people on LinkedIn because I use it as a broadcast channel, right? Like, so a lot of stuff goes out in there. So I'm like, you feel bad. I'm like, hey, by the way, I'm accepting your connection, but you just became my audience. And but somebody, you'll get that inbound, and I just look at the title, or what the company is. I'm like, oh, I know what's coming. You hit accept,
Mm,
and then like 9 minutes later, hey, thanks for connecting. One of the challenges that people face is being able to write good whiteboard videos on their product, and we solve that problem. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a whiteboard video to reply to these people on how to do better prospecting.
yeah, a lot of people make a lot of the spammy types on. I think they make the assumption that I like work inside a company, and so they'll talk to me about like managing my team or something,
Yes.
and I'm like, dude, this is actually not a problem that I have.
as an expert operating cloud native environments, you clearly want
Yes,
to.
exactly.
And I know you probably get this thing if you've ever seen the movie Boiler Room. It's a one of the scenes. This fellow's like this crazy, aggressive salesperson. He learns these techniques, and someone calls from the New York Times, like, "Oh, can I? Would you like a subscription to the New York Times?" And he's like, "No, thanks. I'm good. I get the Post, whatever." And they're like, "Okay, thank you for your day." And he goes, "What, that's it?" And he then goes for like 20 minutes, like schooling them, like, you got to go for the close, like ask for their business. You got to do this, like entice them. What do they really want? Do you want the Post? Do you want this? Do you want to light up your day? And he's like, and the guy gets all fired up. He goes, "Excellent." He goes, "So would you like a subscription?" He goes, "Nope." But when someone pitches you, you almost want to reply like, "Okay, do I need to coach you how to do this? Like, you can do better. I'm disappointed."
Yeah, so to go on a personal tangent, I'm getting certified to be a foster parent, and
Oh, wow.
as like a marketer, or I guess I'm not really a marketer anymore, but anyway, there's this, like, it's a bazillion step process, but I'm always like, oh, you guys need to work on your funnel. No wonder you have no foster parents. Like, oh my God.
It
Um,
is. It's really wild, and thank you for doing that. That's a really noble thing. It's something that it's not often understood, the impact it can have, and how difficult it is to start the process. People just think like, "Oh, you just, go sign a form and you do it." Like, no, this is it's not an easy thing. There's no license to have kids. In fact, it happens far more accidentally than it does on purpose. And then when you want to go out and specifically, bring a child into a family, it's not an easy process for many good reasons, of course, but it's at the same time you're like, but can I not shorten the cycle on this here? I'm a qualified lead.
right, exactly. That's exactly what I want to say. Like, hey, I'm a qualified lead. Like, let's let's move through this process a little bit. No,
Exactly.
in all seriousness, it is quite a process. So they're coming to my house next week.
Well, good luck and on that, and I hope it goes as smoothly as it can go. I've got a few friends that also foster, and it's yeah, not a simple process, which shows the intent and how strong it is that you do have to go out of your way to make this happen. So it'll the results will show in what it is. But yeah, here you go. He was like, "Okay, look, I'm a qualified lead. You've got access to the EB. I'm your technical champion. I got
Yep,
everything."
exactly.
We know
I am the decision maker.
exactly. We know the required capabilities. We know the ineffective alternatives. We've got it all right here. Funnel making for fosters. It's something we need. But I hope that people really do learn that there's so much that's important in what you do and what we all can do to just understand why this stuff works, and it happens at many layers in life and business.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This was a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Emily, very much. And shout out again to Chris over at Miss.io for putting us together. Big shout out to Alex and the New Stack and all the folks over there who I'm a longtime fan of their content. And yeah, like I said, people can go just do a quick search for Emily Omier. You'll see the New Stack pop up, and do check it out as well as your blog.
Well, thank you.